For nearly 1,000 years, the nobility ruled Europe. They owned the land, they owned the people, and they thought nothing could touch them. But then, overnight, their world collapsed. A plague swept across continents, wiping out half the population, and with it the power structure that had stood for centuries. But in the ashes of old money, a new kind of power rose. Men who didn't inherit their wealth, they built it. And they played the game very differently. This is the story of how the Black Death didn't just kill millions. It killed the old world, changed the economy, and crowned a new elite. They called him the Merchant of Prado. But before the legend, before the fortune, there was a world on fire. Francesco di Marco Datini stood in the heart of Tuscany and watched an empire of trade collapse overnight. The Black Death had arrived like a silent army. No banners, no warning, only the stench of fear and the rattle of death carts. Merchants who once swaggered through market squares now hid behind bolted doors. Others fled entirely, abandoning ships, cargo, and contracts in a desperate bid to survive. But Datini didn't run. He did something almost no one else dared. He stayed, he watched, and he learned. While rivals clung to old habits, Datini turned the chaos into a blueprint for power. He studied every price shift, every broken trade route, every desperate bargain struck in shadowed taverns. And as half of Europe's population fell, he positioned himself not just to survive, but to rise. Because the plague didn't just kill people, it killed business models too. In the ashes, a new breed of entrepreneur emerged, one that would rewrite the rules of European commerce. Forever. But how does a man find opportunity in the world's darkest hour? And where did this catastrophe truly begin? The answer starts on a dock in 1347. The plague didn't just sweep through towns, it rewrote the laws of supply and demand overnight. Entire industries collapsed. Wool merchants, ship owners, and spice traders watched fortunes dissolve as quickly as the black swellings on their skin. But in that devastation, Francesco di Marco Datini saw patterns. Ships still sailed, but fewer captains dared the voyage. Those who did demanded double, sometimes triple the usual freight price. Grain caravans no longer flowed steadily into the cities, making each sack of wheat more precious than gold. Datini understood something most merchants couldn't stomach. In a world where death set the rules, scarcity was the new currency. While competitors hoarded goods out of fear, he moved them strategically, using famine and scarcity to set his own terms. And yet, this wasn't simple profiteering. It was calculated positioning. He invested in relationships, lending to struggling producers at interest rates they could live with now, but which would bind them to him for years. He offered credit when others demanded cash, turning desperate suppliers into loyal partners. Still, the morality was murky. Every transaction he made was a balance between mutual survival and opportunism. Was he saving livelihoods or exploiting ruin? This duality became the foundation of his empire. Datini didn't just trade goods, he traded certainty in a world that had none. The more chaos raged, the more indispensable he became. But if the plague had taught him how to profit from instability, what came next would teach him something even more dangerous: how to control it. By the late 14th century, Datini had learned something most merchants never dared to believe. Survival didn't come from guarding your fortune. It came from expanding it into places others feared to go. The plague had shown him how fragile local markets were. One outbreak, one siege, one bad harvest, and a city's entire economy could vanish overnight. So, he built a safety net that spanned continents. From the bustling ports of Pisa to the textile workshops of Avignon, Datini placed trusted agents, not just employees but men who owed their livelihood to his capital. Each agent acted as his eyes, ears, and hands, relaying news of price shifts, political unrest, and shipping delays faster than any rival could react. But Datini's genius wasn't just in hiring talent, it was in connecting them. He developed an intricate system of coded correspondence, merchant ledgers, and interlinked accounts that allowed him to move goods and money across borders with surgical precision. At a time when most traders operated within a single city, Datini's network stretched from the Mediterranean to the markets of Flanders, anticipating demand before it even existed. This web of influence was more than a business tool. It was a shield. If war shut down one route, he diverted goods through another. If famine struck one region, he shifted his focus to a thriving one. His risk was never tied to a single market's fate. Yet there was something almost invisible, almost modern about what he was building. These weren't just trade connections. They were the arteries of a financial organism that pulsed across borders, immune to the collapse of any single city. Datini was no longer just a merchant in Prato. He had become a merchant everywhere. But the true breakthrough was yet to come when he discovered a way to make money not just from the goods he sold, but from the very movement of money itself. For most merchants of the late Middle Ages, money was a heavy, dangerous thing. Gold and silver coins had to be carried in sacks across mountains and seas, a journey that invited every pirate, bandit, and corrupt official along the way. Francesco Datini hated that vulnerability. He saw it for what it was, a bottleneck. It didn't matter how fast your ship sailed if your money crawled home behind them. The solution he devised was as elegant as it was revolutionary. Instead of moving coins, he began moving promises. A merchant in Barcelona could deposit funds with Datini's agent there, receive a signed letter, and that letter could be redeemed for cash in Pisa, Florence, or Avignon. No physical gold had to travel, only ink and parchment. To us, it might sound like basic banking, but in the 14th century, it was almost sorcery. Datini had created an early form of the bill of exchange, a financial instrument that allowed wealth to flow invisibly across borders. And he didn't stop there. He began selling goods before they even arrived, locking in prices through forward contracts. He financed other merchants' ventures in exchange for a share of their profits, turning trade into a kind of investment portfolio. Each of these innovations made him richer, but more importantly, they made him untouchable. Kings could seize ships, storms could sink cargo, thieves could plunder caravans. But Datini's real wealth was in paper promises and contracts that existed in multiple cities at once. He had quietly shifted from being a man who traded goods to a man who traded risk itself, and that, more than any warehouse of wool or barrels of olive oil, was what made him powerful. What Datini may not have realized then was that he was laying the foundation for an entirely new era. One in which the people who controlled the flow of money, rather than the goods themselves, would control the world. For all his genius with contracts and calculations, Francesco Datini lived in a world where fortunes could be destroyed by forces no ledger could predict. The 14th century was a chessboard of shifting powers, kings waging endless wars, city-states plotting against one another, and the ever-present threat of the church's political reach. For a merchant, crossing a border was never just a matter of geography. It was stepping into another ruler's ambitions. Datini learned early that neutrality was not just a diplomatic stance, it was a survival strategy. He avoided taking sides in wars unless profit demanded it, and when it did, he ensured he had contracts on both sides of the battlefield. To his rivals, it seemed risky. To Datini, it was insurance. If one side lost, he'd still have winning contracts with the other. But politics were only one danger. The far greater threat was invisible. In 1348, the Black Death tore through Europe, killing nearly half the population. Datini was still a young man, but he saw the chaos firsthand. Ports abandoned, caravans halted, debts left unpaid as both rich and poor vanished overnight. Most merchants panicked. Datini adapted. He learned to diversify not just his goods but his geography. If plague shut down trade in Florence, his agents in Avignon or Barcelona kept business flowing. He spread his operations so wide that no single disaster could kill them all. And while the church condemned usury, Datini mastered the art of disguising interest within complex contracts, staying on the right side of both law and morality, or at least appearing to. This allowed him to operate in Catholic markets others feared to enter. What emerged was a merchant who understood that survival wasn't about avoiding risk, but about structuring it so that no single blow could end you. By the time other merchants returned to rebuilding their fortunes after plague or war, Datini had already doubled his reach. He wasn't just surviving Europe's chaos, he was feeding on it. The irony? While kings and nobles gambled their wealth on wars and glory, Datini's quiet empire of paper and promises was quietly outlasting them all. In an age when most merchants trusted their memory more than their books, one man was quietly rewriting the rules of commerce. His name was Francesco di Marco Datini, and his genius lay not in bold gambles or political influence, but in building a machine that could turn uncertainty itself into profit. The typical medieval merchant kept a single ledger, scribbling down major deals when he remembered. Datini? He ran 2 parallel accounting books, cross-checking every transaction like a 14th century forensic auditor. Every coin, every shipment, every whisper of market change, documented. And he didn't just track numbers, he tracked patterns, customer habits, regional risks, seasonal trends. Through an endless stream of letters to his agents scattered across Europe, he turned information into an early warning radar, decades before market intelligence was a concept. In a world where news traveled on horseback, Datini had the equivalent of a high-speed data feed. One surviving letter from Bruges shows just how powerful this was. His agent warned that Flemish wool prices would spike due to a shipping delay. Datini acted instantly, buying inventory 3 days before his rivals even knew what was coming. When the market moved, he was already counting the profits. But his brilliance wasn't just in spotting opportunities, it was in surviving disasters. While other merchants tied their fortunes to a single trade route or commodity, Datini spread his risk like a modern investment fund. Multiple markets, multiple products, cargo split across several ships, insurance to cover losses. If plague shut down one city or war closed a port, his income kept flowing from somewhere else. He built flexibility into everything. Partnerships were short-term and adjustable so he could expand in good times and pull back in bad without being chained to deadweight deals. He refused to lend to notoriously unreliable princes and kept his politics to himself, sidestepping the fatal entanglements that ruined others when kings fell or borders shifted. While many merchants prayed for stability, Datini assumed chaos was permanent. His business wasn't a fortress, it was a fleet ready to tack with the wind at a moment's notice. By mastering information, diversifying risk, and staying agile, he didn't just endure the chaos of his age, he profited from it. And in doing so, he helped create a new class of merchants whose wealth would one day challenge the very foundations of European society. For nearly a millennium, Europe's wealth and power were locked in the grip of the aristocracy. They didn't just own the land, they owned the people who worked it. Peasants toiled under the ancient feudal bargain, labor in exchange for protection, survival in exchange for loyalty. It was a closed loop, and for generations it worked flawlessly. Then the Black Death came and tore the system apart. When the plague cleared, the survivors weren't just alive, they were free. Free from lords who no longer had the manpower to enforce their will. Free from the idea that wealth could only be inherited, never created. A new class emerged: merchants, craftsmen, traders, people who owed nothing to the old order. Their wealth didn't sit buried in medieval estates producing slow, fixed returns. It moved, it adapted, it grew. The labor shortage created Europe's first real job market. Workers could choose where to go and who to work for. And they did. Lords who once commanded loyalty now had to bid for it. Peasants walked away from their manors and into better deals, forcing nobles into the unfamiliar position of competing for labor like any other commodity. Men like Francesco di Marco Datini made fortunes that made old noble families look poor. Nobles had static estates. Datini had liquid capital. He could move it overnight, seize opportunities, and pivot with the markets. The aristocrats couldn't. Their wealth was tied to the slow grind of agriculture, while the merchants played a new, faster game. The manorial system collapsed under its own weight. Rising wages, shrinking workforces, and shifting economics forced many lords to abandon direct control over their lands, leasing them instead to entrepreneurial farmers who could actually make them profitable. By 1500, countless nobles had been reduced to rent collectors, dependent on market prices, not medieval privilege. Cities, desperate for skilled labor, broke down old guild restrictions. Apprenticeships shortened. Talented workers rose faster. The rigid walls between classes began to crack. Wealth now came from skill, innovation, and calculated risk, not just a coat of arms. The plague had done the unthinkable. It killed the economy that had ruled Europe for 1,000 years. In its place stood something far more dynamic, a proto-capitalist society where money could be made, moved, and multiplied without the blessing of a king or the bloodline of a duke. What looked like the end of the world turned out to be the birth of a new one. History's greatest fortunes often emerge from history's darkest hours. The Black Death was a disaster beyond imagination. Yet for those who could see through the smoke, it was also a once-in-a-century opening. Francesco di Marco Datini didn't just survive the chaos, he fed on it. While others scrambled to restore the old order, Datini used its collapse as raw intelligence. He built systems that could pivot instantly, partnerships that could dissolve overnight, and a network that turned whispers into opportunities before anyone else even knew they existed. His secret wasn't luck, it was mindset. He treated volatility not as an obstacle but as an advantage. In a crisis, most people cling to what they know. Datini did the opposite. He rewrote the rules. And that's the question I'll leave you with. When your next crisis hits, will you cling to the old model, or will you build your own Datini-style playbook? Because chaos doesn't just destroy fortunes, it creates them. The only question is, who will see it first? If you found this video insightful, hit the subscribe button and join our community for more deep dives into untold financial history stories and groundbreaking revelations shaping the global economy. Click the next video for another intriguing narrative. Thanks for watching.